Nigeria, traveled a long distance to be with us today and will testify, and this is from his testimony. Militant Fulani herdsmen are terrorists. They steal and vandalize. They kill and boast about it. They kidnap and rape. And they enjoy total impunity for this from the elected officials. None of them, I repeat his quote, none of them have been arrested and brought to justice. In December of 2020, President Trump designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern, only to be reversed without justification by Secretary Blinken in November of 2021. And I know I asked him at hearings. I asked him privately, but also asked him at open hearings, why? Never got a good answer.
Yes, the issue of the Fulani banditry terrorism in Nigeria has become a global concern. Now, looking at the second video, the attached video, you can see the Fulani herders, cattle rearers, how they are playing in the farm. They are actually uprooting the cassava. This happening somewhere in the southeast, where the Fulani herdsmen relax in somebody's farm, harvesting their crops and feeding their cattle. Are you all seeing what is happening in that second video? This is just the little you can see. There is also another video which you will see while you are listening to this honorable people speaking in this video. You will see another video of Fulani kidnappers, organ harvesters. Who is sponsoring these people? Why is the government of Nigeria not taking action against them? And the worst is that after the whole of this bullshit, they still reintegrate them into the Nigerian military.
Let me just say parenthetically, I tried for 3 years to get the Clinton administration to designate Boko Haram as an FTO, of the Obama administration, as a foreign terrorist organization. I held hearing after hearing, and they wouldn't do it. On the day I was marking up my legislation to do this, just that, State Department said, oh, we're going to designate them an FTO. And after all the crimes they were committing, later it was the Chibok girls, it was all the other atrocities being committed by Boko Haram, and they wouldn't even give them the FTO status so we could start investigating where they get their money, their weapons, and the like.
Today on conflict and religious persecution in Nigeria. I think all of us here know that the African continent is at a pivotal moment. The continent is the youngest in the world, and in Nigeria alone, 70% of the population is under 35 and 40% is under 15. So it represents the future generations who will continue to lead and solve the world's challenges. Nigeria has a unique position as a bellwether, as Africa's largest economy, most populous nation, and a significant actor in the region and on the world stage. Meanwhile, Nigeria is facing its own challenges, like rising insecurity, shrinking freedom of expression, and a struggling economy, which are preventing the country from experiencing long-term stability and prosperity. That's why I'm glad this subcommittee is convening a hearing to discuss some of the challenges facing Nigeria, and I hope we can use this as an opportunity to discuss how the United States can use its full range of tools to help address conflict and violence across the country. Nigeria is facing multiple different security challenges in various parts of the country, including violent extremist groups, criminal banditry, farmer-herder conflict, and religiously motivated violence. Several factors are driving these conflicts. Yes, religion is a factor, but other dynamics like climate change, population pressures, and governance challenges are important drivers that need to be addressed as well. For example, in Northeast, where Boko Haram and now ISIS West Africa are active, decades of marginalization and over-securitized responses have led to human rights abuses and instigated and exacerbated the conflict. I actually worked on Nigeria when I was at the State Department, and I have seen that for years, governance challenges like corruption, marginalization, and impunity have driven violence and conflict. A history of marginalization and limited access to basic needs in central and northern Nigeria and among different ethnic groups have created grievances that fuel further violence. So we must address these fundamental challenges to ensure stabilization and security and prevent violence in the long term. I am also concerned by the state of freedom of religion or belief in Nigeria. However, we need to be careful in our characterization of this complex challenge. Roughly half of the population of Nigeria is Muslim, while the other half is Christian, and violations of this freedom impact both groups. Oversimplistic narratives about the violence perpetuate harmful stereotypes and motivate tensions and violence based on religious identity. On the question of a potential country of particular concern designated for Nigeria, the Trump administration should make a determination based on the criteria provided in the International Religious Freedom Act. But we cannot ignore the other tools in our toolbox. especially foreign assistance, which has been effective at supporting Nigerians with addressing the key drivers of conflict and religious freedom violations. For years, the United States has supported Nigerian institutions, civil society, faith-based leaders, and researchers to address the conflict, violence, and religious freedom challenges. But unfortunately, President Trump has canceled hundreds of millions of dollars in these programs, leaving the United States less equipped to address the topic of today's hearing. Trump canceled all of our peace, democracy, and governance activities worth $74 million. These programs helped improve early response to conflict, bolster the justice system, and facilitate dialogue. He canceled all of our education and economic growth programs, altogether totaling nearly $170 million. These projects were getting at the root cause of conflict and violence across the country. And that's not to mention all of the canceled humanitarian assistance that was helping those who've survived war and conflict. Trump's aid freeze has closed clinics and left over 2 million Nigerians without access to HIV medication. In total, President Trump canceled 54 foreign assistance programs just in Nigeria. Mr. Chair, I request unanimous consent to submit a document listing all paused or terminated programs in Nigeria into the record. Thank you. So if we want the United States to help improve conflict in Nigeria, we can't pull back and eliminate our toolbox, which is exactly what the Trump administration is doing. So I hope that during this hearing, we can hear more about what the United States can actually do to support Nigerians in a whole of government approach to address conflict and violence and protect religion.
In the North and Christians in the South. In 2023, over 3,500 people were kidnapped, almost 9,000 were killed in conflict. So the work that must be done includes essential efforts to bring these diverse communities together and strengthen governance to end corruption and violence. It is both logical and necessary for the United States to fund projects in Nigeria that engage local communities to create space for interfaith dialogue and address the root causes of violence, such as access to resources, education, and healthcare, with the nuance that they deserve. These are not trivial, unnecessary projects. This is the work that has to be done to stabilize a country, to bring humanitarian assistance to those caught in the midst of violence and conflict and extremism, and bring about peace. Let me be clear that the mass cancellation of USAID projects and the dismantling of USAID by the Trump administration will only worsen this violence and weaken the institutions needed to combat extremism before it reaches our borders. Before the reckless actions of the Trump administration, the United States was the largest donor to the humanitarian response in Nigeria, but the administration's attack on foreign assistance, on diversity initiatives, and so-called wokeism are weakening the very tools that we need to address these complex crises. I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses and discussing more the situation and what the United States can do to make sure that we remain a strong partner in supporting the governance of Nigeria.
My testimony will focus on the persecution of Christian farming communities by militant Fulani Muslim herders. In the interest of time, I will not address the Islamist terror groups that are already designated as terrorist and sanctioned by the U.S. government. They include Boko Haram and the Islamic State of West Africa, which attacks Nigerians of all faith backgrounds. Nigeria now ranks 6 out of 66 on the just released 2025 Global Terrorism Index. Nigeria is the world's deadliest country for Christians, according to the respected group Open Doors. Currently, militant groups of nomadic Fulani Muslim herders are reported by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, among others, to be the greatest threat to Nigerian Christians, particularly those that we're now seeing in the Middle Belt farming communities. In Benue, Plateau, Kaduna, and other Middle Belt states, thousands of Christians have been killed, maimed, and raped, and millions of them have been driven from their lands and are now homeless due to Fulani attacks. This is the heart of Nigeria's breadbasket, and as their farming families are slaughtered or forced to flee, the region's suffering is compounded by growing mass hunger. Moreover, the targeted indigenous people of the Middle Belt Christian communities face the Nigerian government's decision to tolerate this persecution. The federal government in Abuja remains passive in the face of desperate cries for help. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees reports of Mimi, one of 2 million IDPs, internally displaced persons, in Benue State. She survived a Fulani attack 3 years ago while her family was tending the yam fields on her farm. It reports, When they looked up, they saw armed men. There was no time to run. The men raped and killed Mimi's 11-year-old daughter. Mimi herself was raped, and her husband was killed. A hunter later found her injured and unconscious and helped her into the bush. They hid her there for 2 days before it was safe enough for him to bring her to the camp. There she received medical treatment and reunited with her 2 sons, now aged 12 and 15. I lost everything, says Mimi. If you go to my village, everything has been burned down. I cannot farm any longer. And it's not only me, we all went through these things. The government allows Fulani violence to continue with impunity. There is broad concern that this reflects a plan to forcibly Islamize Nigeria in violation of its secular constitution. Last week, the Nigerian Catholic Bishops' Conference released a letter expressing deep concern that some of the 12 northern states that impose Sharia law ordered Catholic and other Christian schools closed for 5 weeks in forced observance of Ramadan. And they cited the Constitution's guarantee of a secular state. Over the last generation, a portion of the Fulani nomadic herder population has become well-armed with automatic weapons and aggressive in targeting undefended Christians in Nigeria's Middle Belt farming areas. Various observers on the ground assert that the Fulani militants are not attacking to graze cattle, as some maintain, but rather to drive out the Christians from their ancestral lands and to take control of land, of villages and larger geographic areas. The UNHCR report above states, quote, nearly all the 3,790 registered residents of Ichwa IDP camp and many other camps dotted around Benue State were smallholder farmers, forced here by violent land grabs. A Benue Catholic priest told reporters it's all about seizing the lands and changing the demography of Benue State. The Fulani terrorists want to seize the fertile lands of Benue, chase away the people from the land, and occupy the lands for themselves, he said. A 2023 study by Nigerian scholars on Plateau State found the great majority of Plateau's indigenous people from non-Fulani ethnic groups believe that Fulani violence is motivated by land grabbing, jihad, and Fulanization, compared with smaller percentages who blame cattle rustling. Cattle rustling does occur, but Fulani attacks are indiscriminate and devastate entire Christian villages. Ignoring citizens' appeals for help, Nigeria's government fails to effectively stop these attacks.
From my time on USERV, I can tell you with certainty that the world is not paying enough attention to the growing humanitarian disaster in Nigeria. Despite its strategic importance as Africa's most populous country, these warning lights are flashing because of this systematic religious persecution driven primarily by Islamists, and it's going unaddressed. Christians are the primary targets. They're murdered, kidnapped, raped, and terrorized on almost a daily basis, as has already been discussed. The numbers are staggering. The brutality is unspeakable, and the silence from global leaders is deafening. Let me share just one recent example. On February 9th, Fulani terrorists armed with AK-47s. These are not hunting rifles. These are rifles designed to kill. I served, after coming out of the Marine Corps, I worked with the State Department in anti-terrorism and very familiar with the mode and operation of terrorists. They stormed a village in Gombe State. They first seized a 9-year-old boy from the Puma family and demanded ransom. They then sought out the Reverend Bala Galadima's home. They found him. They broke into his home. They demanded money. He pleaded with them, saying that he had none, but he offered them what he had. He had grain, so he offered them grain. They refused. They shot him 3 times, killing him. Sadly, this is not an isolated incident. In late January, Boko Haram launched a series of coordinated attacks on Christian villages in Chibok, the same region where 276 schoolgirls were kidnapped in 2014, Mr. Chairman. You'll remember that. We discussed it then. In fact, many of those girls remain captives to this day. The terrorists set homes and churches ablaze, destroyed livestock, and demanded that Christians convert or they die. More than 4,000 believers have been forced to flee for their lives in recent weeks alone. As has been mentioned, according to Open Doors, more Christians are murdered for their faith in Nigeria than any other country in the world. In 2024 alone, 3,100 Christians were killed. 2,830 were kidnapped. These are not just numbers. These are fathers, their mothers, their children, their families. These massacres were caused by climate change, that desperate Fulani herders were simply looking for pasture land. Let me be clear. This is not about climate change. It's about a violent extremist ideology that seeks to eliminate Christianity from Nigeria's northern and central regions. The evidence is undeniable. This is systematic religious violence. The U.S. government must act, and they must act now. Nigeria must be redesignated a country of particular concern.
Nigeria and eventually my diocese and the state of Benue have become, in recent years, one of the most dangerous and insecure places for Christians. Christians and Muslims are nearly evenly divided among Nigeria's large population of over 200 million persons. Islamist extremists are fiercely contesting the possession, control, and governing law of the land, especially in the country's northern and central regions, the latter of which is where Benue is located. There are constant ethnic, political, and religious conflicts over land and allegiance. Constitutionally, we are a secularist country, but our unity has been fragile. Political and religious actions and even public speech have been carefully managed to avoid accusations of religious bias and political tensions. Today, the clear influence of Islamist extremists has changed the traditional social dynamics of tribe, ethnicity, religion, and the social status in Nigeria. Because just recently, at the beginning of the Ramadan fast, 12 states in northern Nigeria have declared closed schools so that they attend to this. And you can imagine which other country in the world does that. Saudi Arabia is not doing it. Afghanistan is not doing it. Baghdad is not doing it. But then Nigeria is practicing. What kind of Islam are they practicing? 12 states. And not only Muslims are living in these places. What happens with the educational program or curriculum of the country? But this is what we are going through every day in Nigeria. A long-term Islamic agenda to homogenize the population has been implemented over several presidencies through a strategy to reduce and eventually eliminate the Christian identity of half of the population. This strategy includes both violent and non-violent actions, such as the exclusion of Christians from positions of power and adoption of such church members, the raping of women, the killing and exploitation of Christians, the destruction of churches and farmlands of Christian farmers, followed by the occupation of such lands by the Fulani herders, and also changing the names of these villages. They are taking over the places, so you clearly see an expansionist approach and Islamic, and then they are making the people now flee and leave their villages, and they conquer it. When we call for help to the police and the army, they do not come. At the end of 2024, several villages were warned by the attackers of the upcoming violence, and the leaders called the police for defense ahead of time. But they did not come, and the Christian massacres, almost customary, took place, killing hundreds in Plateau and Benue, with the worst massacre claiming 47 people. The militants also burned down the 8 Catholic churches of St. Mary's Parish in the Diocese of Boko, which in Benue State, as well as the parish house, clinics, schools, and other houses. The militant Fulani herdsmen bear on defenseless villagers without consequences. They follow orders to conquer, kill, and occupy. They attack even those who have managed to escape into our IDP camps. Thereby, they have no place to run to. And it is unfortunate that the police system in Nigeria, orders have to come from above. And such that once there's a call, and they say they have never responded. And by the time they arrive, these people have left, and the people are now living in the pool of their blood. What I have recounted above is happening not only in Benue State. I believe our experience in Benue is symptomatic of what is happening elsewhere in large parts of Nigeria. The experience of the Nigerian Christians today can be summed up as that of a church under Islamist extermination. It is frightening to live there. Apart from the violent campaigns and attacks against Christian villages, there are now attempts by the Islamic Council of Nigeria and various Islamic groups to impose Sharia law on the Christian populations. Already, 12 states in the north of Nigeria are under this sectarian religious law, and attempts to extend the same to the south of Nigeria, which they have started. This month, governors in the north decided appropriately to close all schools and education institutions during the months of Ramadan, leaving millions of students without learning opportunity for 5 weeks. We live in fear because at any point it can be our turn to be killed, but to remain silent is to die twice. So, I have chosen to speak. I speak on behalf of the millions who are in the camps. In Benue State, in Makurdi Diocese alone, in my diocese, I have about 9 camps. 9. On the 5th of March, which was Ash Wednesday, We visited one of the camps, and many of my priests and religious went to the other camps, distributed them to begin the Ash Wednesday with our faithful who are there, because we are the voice of the voiceless. We have to talk for the defenseless. We have to talk about the weak and those who cannot talk about themselves. In one of the camps called the Mega Camp, there were over 3,000 inmates of that camp, and which was a record given to us by government. I speak on behalf of them and those children who have no husband, who have no father, and even their own voices taken away by the politicians who promised to help them, but have become the willing tools of the jihadists because they are talking politically correct statements, looking for next elections to come. I speak on behalf of those whose loved ones have been killed, but no one has even offered a word of consolation to them. I speak on behalf of the thousands of young girls who have been adopted and raped because no one, not even the media, mentions them anymore. Foremost, I speak on behalf of my flock who are unable to worship freely and unable to return to their ancestral farms and homes because that land has been ruthlessly taken from them by the armed herdsmen. And where they say they want to live in peace with the natives, if you must farm, you have to pay tax to hire the land which belongs to you. That is slavery, to say the least about it.
Everyone on this witness table has said the same thing, that there's been this failure to hold accountable the perpetrators of these atrocities. And it's actually worse than someone robbing your home. It's a systematic, coordinated attack that cleanses entire villages and farming areas of the population who have a certain religious profile that they don't like, I guess. But we don't know. We really don't know what the motives or intents are because the government doesn't investigate or bring to trial anyone for these horrible attacks. And as the bishop pointed out, and he is incredibly courageous to come forward today, as he said, he doesn't want to die twice. I hope not even once. But
Interesting. Nigeria terrorism has become a matter of concern internationally, globally. You see, do you remember when General Musa was interviewed by one American journalist, where General Musa said that he is ready to face the International Criminal Court, denying that there is no terrorism in Nigeria? You see, it has become a global concern that all the glamoring, all the insecurity, all the terrorism, banditry, all the Fulani terrorism, which is being sponsored by, should I say, politicians or what? Because if the politicians, the Nigeria government doesn't want to web into investigation into it, then it's practically visible to say that it is sponsored by the government or opposition parties, so to say. When they brought Boko Haram to destabilize Goodluck Ebere Jonathan regime, you see, till today, the Boko Haram is still attacking, is still destroying, is still maiming, is still kidnapping, is still terrorizing and destroying everything in Nigeria. And the government, since 2015 or thereabout, haven't done anything about it. And you're telling me that Nigeria is a secure place for human beings to live. And this is why Biafrans refer Nigeria as a zoo country, because everything there is just happening as if it's a zone where animals dwell. Can you imagine? Population of Christians in Nigeria has been decreased to 0. Taking for instance the case of Deborah, who was people right now, I would want to know your opinion about this recent development, because talking about the insecurity or every corruption, everything happening in Nigeria, if we like talk from now till tomorrow, there is nothing they are willing to do about it. But let's hope that the emerging of Trump back in the seat again will do justice to Nigeria, because what is going on in Nigeria, the governance, the terrorism, has become a global concern. And in my own suggestion, I am suggesting to the global community, international community, to investigate this, listen to the cry of the indigenous people, especially the Biafrans. The best solution to this problem happening in Nigeria is division. Let the Christians be on their own, let the Muslims be on their own, the division, because Nigeria is a scattered country. So many ethnic groups in Nigeria, different languages, different culture, everything is seemingly not working out as same lane. The division of Nigeria is gonna give the best solution to all these things happening in Nigeria. What do you suggest? What solution do you have to all the atrocities happening in Nigeria? Please kindly share your opinion, subscribe to this channel, share this video to others. Nigeria terrorism has become a global concern, and we do hope that the international community fix up this problem ASAP.